South Africa's economy grew more than expected in the second quarter. That's thanks to a recovery in mining, as well as an improvement in the energy utility Eskom, which managed to keep the power running. Together with Nigeria, the two nations account for almost half of the sub-Saharan Africa's GDP. But they're also the continent's slowest growing economies. For more on this, Daniel Silke joins me now from Cape Town in South Africa. He's the director of the Political Futures Consultancy. Daniel, this result for South Africa, better than some analysts had expected. How do you think the business sector is going to respond?
Yes, well, I think there'll be a sense of relief that at the very least we're not in negative territory. We've staved off a technical recession, which would have been 2 successive quarters of negative growth. And I think that the business community are looking for any sign of life in the economy. It's been under substantial strain over the course of the last 18 months or so. Our equity markets have fallen. There's been a degree of capital flight out of South Africa as well, certainly from investors. And I think this will at least perhaps give President Ramaphosa some slight encouragement that we might have plateaued, and hopefully there is now to be a small improvement going forward.
As you say, South Africa has avoided a technical recession, but it doesn't mean the economy is out of the woods yet, does it?
Well, not at all. In fact, I think we should see today's better figures as effectively a reaction to the incredibly poor first quarter GDP results that were clearly skewed negatively as a result of the power outages in South Africa that affected every aspect of business. So we've bounced back in a sense, we've stabilized, but year-on-year growth is still lower than 1%. And this is a country that needs 4 or 5 or preferably 6% GDP to absorb all of those job seekers that come onto our market every single year. We've got 10 million people unemployed in South Africa, and we need much bigger structural reforms in the country before our economy really can be sustainably growing.
To the other big economy, Nigeria, its growth rate slowed in the second quarter. That was lower than what people had expected.
Yes, I think there'll be some disappointment in Nigeria that they couldn't build on just over 2% GDP growth. It slipped ever so slightly back down to 1.4% from quarter to quarter. But overall, over the last year or so, also, there's been at least positive growth. Look, both Nigeria and South Africa, the 2 large economies of the continent, both of them underperforming. Both of them with the need for structural change. In the case of Nigeria, better tax collection for sure is needed, and a more diversified economy. Nigeria still relies upon foreign exchange revenues from its oil production sector. And indeed, if that sector is under pressure as a result of lower oil prices, perhaps as a result of a lower global growth, the Nigerian economy is going to feel more pressure over the course of the coming year or so. So I think it's tough for Nigeria going forward, but at the very least, again, we've seen the country at least stave off a recession. It was in recession. It's now out of a recession as well.
Daniel, you say that both countries are in need of structural change. Do you think that both or either of them are on track for that? Can we expect to see a positive improvement anytime soon?
Well, I certainly think that in the South African case, there's a tremendous domestic debate as to exactly what needs to be done. Much of the debate in the South African political scene depends upon the governing African National Congress and whether it can get buy-in from its alliance partners who all have their own particular economic and ideological agenda. Perhaps also in Nigeria, the position is quite different there because there you need a governance overhaul. And in particular, you need to spread the tax net in Nigeria in order to raise revenue and capital rather than rely on borrowings as the Nigerians have done. So the issues are quite different in both countries. But I certainly think that in the South African case, there is the potential for a breakthrough on economic policy, so long as President Ramaphosa and his finance minister, Pravin Gordhan, pursue relentlessly a reform agenda, which they have tried to do over the course of the last few months.
What do you think is standing in the way of that reform agenda? What would you like to see as your top pick to change that, to overcome some of those hurdles?
Well, look, my top pick certainly would be to involve the private sector to a much greater degree in our state-owned enterprises. They are the biggest drain on the South African economy at the moment. Poor governance and corruption in many of those state-owned enterprises are causing the country huge losses. There are huge borrowings as a result just to keep them afloat. And we really do need a major restructuring of our power supply company, Eskom. We also need a review of the staff complement at Eskom. And of course, we need a greater ability of the private sector to inject themselves into energy generation as well. Take away some of the reliance on the state and move it off to the private sector in some way or other. And we need that beyond the electricity company. We need that in our state-owned airline and elsewhere as well.
Daniel Silke from Cape Town joining us. Thank you very much for that analysis.